I'm so excited for you to hear this episode with Dr. Catherine Clinton. She is a naturopathic physician. She's also just a phenomenal human being. And this is the fourth episode in our quantum biology series. And so I love the way that Catherine talks about quantum biology. You can't help but get excited about quantum biology when you hear her talk about it. But she does such a beautiful job of talking about the science and why this is such an exciting time that we're understanding all of these things. But we talk a lot about trauma and our nervous system and our immune system and look at that from a quantum biology perspective. So it was a fascinating, wonderful conversation for me. I hope you feel the same. Please make sure that you check out, Catherine has amazing posts on Instagram. She is killing it over there. And she also has courses. So make sure you check out her website. I will put that in the show notes. And please, of course, let us know in the comments or send me some comments how you like this episode. Dr. Catherine Clinton, I'm so excited to get to talk to you. Thank you so much for coming on the show. It is an honor and a privilege to have you here.
Well, thank you so much, Kelly, for having me. It's an absolute pleasure and honor to be talking with you today.
Yeah. So I have lots of things to talk to you, and I'll be mindful of our time. So I'll try to make sure that we cover as much as possible in our time together. But I love the way that you describe quantum biology. I just think your enthusiasm, it's hard to resist. You want to know more when you talk about it. So I thought we could start there of just kind of what is quantum biology and this excitement around the frontier of this new science.
It's so exciting, Kelly. I just am just obsessed. So when I was in medical school, everything was based on a Newtonian biology, a chemical, mechanical sort of backdrop to everything in the body.
Yep.
And that's how we really saw everything.
Yep.
And it continues to be how mainstream medicine looks at things. And so when I was in medical school, it was all about chemicals. It was all about receptors and locks. And so we have these receptor proteins in our body. And then the idea was that we have these keys floating around, bumping into things, and eventually they'll find their special lock, and the key and receptor will come together and initiate biological action. And what we know now is that every cell in our body, and we have trillions and trillions of cells, right? Every cell in our body is completing over 100,000 tasks each second. And so that's just an astronomical amount of biological action that cannot be explained by this Newtonian lock and key model. Now, it doesn't mean that there aren't locks and keys and receptors in the body, chemicals working. I mean, all of that is still happening. But what we're finding out is that there's this sea, really an ocean of quantum biological action that's really giving birth to those chemical reactions. All those things we learned in school are being driven by what we didn't learn in school, right? This structured water body we have within us and the quantum phenomenon that happens at that interface of our cell membranes, of our fascia, of our vessels, our blood vessels, our lymphatic vessels, our cranial sacral vessels. All of these things are acting in a fundamentally quantum biological way. And now we're at the part where science is catching up and we can no longer ignore these smaller pieces, and we get to see the impacts of the sun and the infinite sea of electrons that line our earth, and how all of these flows of electrons and protons and photons of light phonons of sound and music, frequency of thoughts and emotions, how all of those are impacting our biology in a fundamental way. And it's really exciting.
It is. It's so exciting. Yeah. And how did you come to quantum biology? I mean, I know that you had some challenges with autoimmune issues yourself. And so and Lyme disease, I think too, right? Um,
Yeah.
so you were making your way and trying things, I assume, and then somehow you made your way to quantum biology. Can you
I
tell me about
did.
that? Yeah.
I did. Yeah. So in medical school, I was diagnosed with Hashimoto thyroiditis, which is an autoimmune reaction that affects the thyroid gland. Yep, very common, right?
Yep, same. Yep.
Yep. And I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, which is an
Uh,
autoimmune reaction that affects the colon. I was really, really sick. And I was diagnosed with Lyme disease and parasitic infections and all kinds of stuff, right? It was when I do it, I really do it. I go for it.
Yeah, yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I was in the perfect place. I was at a naturopathic medical school. I was right down the hill from an allopathic medical school that was very integrative and open, and across the river from an acupuncture school. So I really had so many modalities at my fingertips. And what I did was I slowed down my school. I did remote for a little while, and I was able to kind of piece back my physical self. And if anybody has suffered with a chronic disease, they know that, putting the pieces back together and getting to that point before you were diagnosed is really life changing. It gets you back to a point where you can engage in life again. I could start going to school again. I could start seeing patients again. But it certainly wasn't the picture of health, right? I was still very much ill and in disease, right? And so that's when I started researching about psychoneuroimmunology and
Yes.
how, yeah, and how
Yes.
our thoughts really impact our physiology.
Yes.
And of course, at that time, it was all chemicals and how
Mhm.
our thoughts release different chemicals and how that interplays with our biology. Then I started looking at mitochondrial health, and
Right.
that sort of blew the doors open to
Yeah.
this frequency information
Yeah.
that's happening not only within us but in the world around us. And that's really what blew the doors open and what really sort of elevated my health to a point where I had never been healthier. And, previously before medical school, I was trying to go to the Olympics in Taekwondo. I was a national athlete. I had won national and international competitions, so I was sort of picture of health in mainstream thinking. But it wasn't until I really understood my place in the world and how it all was interconnected
Mhm.
that I was able to achieve a level of health that I had never experienced before. And my patients had never experienced before. Kelli, the way I describe it is like a puzzle piece, right? Where we're putting together the pieces of the puzzle. And we've got a piece of the puzzle and we put it in, and it's the right piece, it's the right place, but we didn't press it in all the way. So, like a corner sticking up, that's sort of how I was living life. I was in the right place, doing the right stuff, but there was just this constant irritation from all the danger signals I had in my life, whether that be from my community, my relationships, from misalignment with the sun, a lack of relationship with nature. I mean, so many different pieces. I was disconnected, and reconnecting with those things brought not only health and vitality, but a sense of safety and belonging
Yeah.
that I wasn't able to find elsewhere. And so now that's really my mission, is not only to bring that knowledge and healing to people, but also that sense of safety and belonging for us to find that in the sun, in a patch of dirt or
Grass.
grass
Yeah,
or
yeah.
green. And that's something that is just, I mean, I can't even place how important that is. Um, it's just phenomenal to experience. So many of my patients come to see me and they haven't ever experienced that exhale of feeling safe, of feeling like they belong. And so to provide that in the world around them is just, it's something that is so incredibly rewarding, not only because people feel better, but there's a reconnection that I think our society and our global society really has walked away from. And once we can really put those pieces back together and get that reconnection, it's not only our health that is elevated. It's the health of the world around us, which we know is so interconnected to our own health. So that's how I got here.
Yeah,
And
that's
I'm not
yeah.
leaving.
No, I'm glad you're not leaving. Yeah. So I'm resonating with a lot of it, because this is how we get here. My background's in clinical mental health. So I had the trauma piece. And here I am, a trauma competent counselor doing all this stuff. And I kept saying, like, it just felt like something wasn't quite right in my own health, too. Cause I also diagnosed with Hashimoto's, also had migraine headaches. Sounds like we're similar in that when we do something, we really do it. I mean, just, yeah. So, but also, I mean, I just resonate so much with that, well enough to function in the world and actually feeling pretty okay a lot of the time. And working with clients that were doing a lot of the right things, seemingly, but still weren't feeling great. And so I just kept sort of going, there's got to be something. So I too found mitochondrial health, and went, okay, first I found gut health, right? Because we started to make the connection, right? So
Yeah.
I know you have terrain, you understand the whole world of gut health. So I was going, okay, that's the piece that's missing. So now we're healing people's guts. That's great. I'm healing my own gut. And it was still not quite right. And we're looking at, in depression, more and more about being disconnected, and more about how we don't feel safe and we don't feel belonging. That's going to impact our immune system. I mean, those are inextricably connected, our immune system and our emotions, right? And so, but then I was trying now in the quantum space, trying to put it all together, because I had this clear picture of the vagus nerve connecting the brain and the gut and all this communication. And I'm like, yeah. And now I'm going, whoa, but the quantum communication blows it out of the water, literally from easy water. We're just getting this quick, instantaneous communication, and quantum coherence really seems to be the thing that
Yeah.
really puts the pieces in place.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Mhm.
And when you look at the vagus nerve,
Yeah.
what are we talking about with the vagus nerve? If we break it down like histologically, right, look at the tissue,
Yeah.
we're talking about fascia.
Yes.
We're talking about quantum communication. And of course we are, but it takes some connecting the dots.
Yeah.
And that's what we're looking at. We're looking at this liquid crystalline communication throughout the body. And from your background, I know that you understand that trauma, emotional trauma and physical trauma, right? But
Yep.
to wrap our heads around the emotional trauma, it can actually cause adhesions, right? So when
Yes.
that trauma goes, right? Once it stops, if it isn't fully able to reverberate through the system, wherever it stops, there becomes an adhesion or a block, right?
Mhm.
In that quantum communication. And so it is absolutely fundamental that we
Yeah.
start bringing this knowledge into all of the healing practices, right? There is no
Right.
line between our head and our body. There
Right.
is,
No. Right.
yeah,
No.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And just to see what's happening, I mean, our structured water body, and I don't know if your listeners know what I'm talking about.
Maybe not. We're doing this quantum series, so by the end, hopefully. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about this exclusion zone water. If you, yeah, because it's so exciting.
It's so exciting, and it's so hand in hand with what we're talking about with the vagus nerve and fascia.
Yeah.
And so this idea of an organized, structured water has been around for a while. It sort of started out with this polywater debacle in Russia, but it wasn't really until 2003 with Gerald
With
Pollack and
Pollock.
his yeah,
Mhm.
but his team out of the University of Washington, and he's just continuing to do amazing work, right? But he was the first to actually identify
Mhm.
this fourth phase of water. It's been called biological water, ordered water, structured water. He termed the um, name easy for exclusion zone water.
Mhm.
And what he found was that along hydrophobic surfaces or hydrophilic surfaces, excuse me, water loving surfaces, and that's a fancy name for our cell membrane, our fascia, our vessel walls, right? These are all hydrophilic in nature,
Mhm.
and they start to form structured water on their surfaces, on the outside and also the inside of them, right?
Right.
And so we found that this structured water
Mhm.
forms one sheet on these hydrophilic surfaces,
Mhm.
and it kind of looks like a hexagonal, like a honeycomb, right? It's
Mhm.
this lattice sheet, and the hydrogens become more tightly bound. And we're used to our different structures of water, right? Our solid ice, our liquid water, our gaseous steam and vapors, right? But this fourth phase is more of a gel, viscous substance. And it's not H2O, it's H3O2. And if we have any mathematicians out there, you'll notice that we're missing a hydrogen, right? It's not H4O2 like you would expect if we doubled that um,
Right.
liquid water, right? And so we're missing a proton. And so as this lattice forms against these hydrophilic surfaces, it kicks out a proton and creates what the research is calling a proton-rich zone or a
Right.
proton wire. And the difference in charge between the two, the separation of charge between the two, is something that we would see in a battery, right? And so Pollock and his team actually put an electrode in the structured water, and it's negatively charged. And of course, another one in the proton rich zone, which you can imagine is positively charged. And the separation of charge between those two zones was
Mhm.
enough to light a battery. It's enough to power biological action. And so this is really coming to the forefront in science. We're starting to see that this structured water is what's on the outside and inside of our cells. Not only that, but when we look at the cell membrane, we see all these proteins embedded into it, right? It's sort of like a necklace with these big beans,
Mhm.
little beads of beans, right? I wish I had a
I'll
little
find
thing
a
I could draw.
picture. I'll find a picture at least for the video of it. Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
it's this bilipid membrane with these proteins that stick out both sides, and
Yeah.
those proteins are covered in the structured water. And what we're finding is changes in the structured water and the energy that it traps change the protein, change biological action, initiate biological action. It's absolutely phenomenal. Excuse me.
That is, yeah, absolutely phenomenal. That I mean, it blows my mind, but I've been studying protons and electrons for a little while. So I follow. Some people might be going, what does this matter to me? Because this exclusion zone water is literally everywhere in the body. It's this quantum communication. And so we can do things to influence it, simple things in our lives. And it comes back to that connection with Earth, connection with ourselves. I used to leave out spiritual, like in my work. Certainly if somebody in my counseling practice brought up religion or spirituality, of course, but it was kind of strange how much I was like, mind, body, mind, body. And it's so, right. I was like, there's this element, whatever you want to call, like life force, energy, God, whatever, that I think you can't leave out. It's mind, body, spirit. And so reconnecting those places that are broken in us, where we feel not belong, we don't feel like we belong, we feel where we don't feel safe for whatever reason, for the very good reasons usually that we feel this way in our lives. But the repair can actually be simple things. So I thought we could talk about that, the very kind of practical, how do we nurture this exclusion zone water?
Yes, absolutely. And so something I didn't mention is
Yeah.
that lattice shape
Mhm.
of the structured water allows it to trap, store, and utilize energy. And of course, Gerald Pollack and his work really focus on infrared energy, right?
Yes.
And we should mention that the sun is the biggest source of infrared energy we have in our solar system.
Yep.
Um, but it's not just that. And so it's really, really amazing when you start to tease the pieces apart here. And we started with trauma and the vagus nerve and fascia. And so looking from a traditional perspective, which we're so used to doing, let's talk about our trauma, let's do exercises with the nervous system. Nobody's talking about the circadian rhythm of our nervous system.
Mhm.
Nobody's talking about when we experience emotional trauma,
Mhm.
it dysregulates our
Our
circadian
circadian.
rhythm.
Yes.
Yes,
I
yes,
literally, I just landed here probably a week or two ago. Like this is so fresh for me, but I really, well, because it's in my own home. I have a son that was diagnosed with chronic illness. And we're just piecing it all together, but I can see it, like how our brain and our nervous system is impacted can change our circadian biology. And then we have to work to get it. It can be fixed, I think,
absolutely.
right?
Yes,
Yes,
absolutely.
great point. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, mhm. Yeah, I was like, so now we're talking about it. Like maybe
Yes,
nobody else is
absolutely.
talking about it in the nervous system, but I think it's our job to bring it to people and bring it to the practitioners and the educators to say, here's
Yes,
a really important piece. With sunlight and this infrared light, we can make it. The mitochondria are just amazing, right? I mean, like it's just this exclusion zone water is the step 4 of the mitochondrial chain. I mean, yes, you know what I'm saying.
yes,
So in the
yes.
mitochondria, in the electric transport chain, this is where it's made. And so these are just fascinating. And we can do things to help, but our mitochondria can make this infrared light. We can make it in our body.
Yep, yep, absolutely. Martin Picard's work is absolutely amazing
Mhm.
because he's showing us that with our thoughts, we can increase our mitochondrial health. And
I know
right,
it's
because
good news, right?
such good news because we hear about mitochondria, and I think most of us think, okay, exercise and of course circadian rhythm and getting that aligned, but there's not these safety inputs. When we're talking about the nervous system, we talk about exercises to do. We talk about talk therapy. We talk about, mental exercises for
Mhm.
our nervous system, breathing and mindfulness. And of course, I love those. I'm not knocking those at all, but I'm saying that there is safety for our nervous system to be had in a patch of grass, in our relationship with the sun, in a relationship with how we've eaten and evolved to eat over millennia, right? One of my favorite research studies, Kelly, is a study, it's multi from a bunch of different places. It
Mhm.
started out looking at the effects of trauma in newborn infants. So
Uh-huh.
infants that had to be removed from their parents because they had a medical intervention they needed to
Right.
do, right? So these scientists, researchers looked at the predictable shift in the gut microbiome that
Mhm.
happens with trauma, right? We see that the microbiome and all the little microbes in there, they switch from more beneficial composition to a more harmful composition.
Mhm.
And so they looked at those infants. They saw once they were removed from their mother that they had that predictable shift in the gut microbiome. Of course they would. That's very traumatic. Now, what they did was they recreated this in animal studies and they gave these removed, traumatized infants omega-3 fatty acids. That's all they did. They supplemented that in the breast milk that they were giving to these infants. And and this, I think the animal studies were done in mice, rats.
Maybe.
And so
Yep. Some rodent.
one of these
Yep. Yep.
little creatures, right? And
Yes.
so what they did was they saw that with the supplementation of omega-3s, a
Mhm.
complete reversal in that microbiome from harmful back to beneficial. So they saw that the trauma induced that shift to a harmful microbiome, and just the additional supplementation of omega-3 fatty acids shift it back to a beneficial composition. And why is that? Were those infants not traumatized anymore? Were they like, I don't need a mom, I've got omega-3s? Of course not. Their biology received a massive dose of what I call a safety signal, right? Those omega-3 fatty acids we have evolved with over millennia. We
Mhm.
have evolved by waterways, eating algae and fish and sources of omega-3 fatty acids.
Mhm.
And so for that research study to show how impactful that is, just in and of itself, and we look at the quantum biological impact of that, we see that DHA has these free electrons. So when we talked about those bilipid cell membranes and the little proteins that are sticking out each end,
Mhm.
bilipid, by the name suggests, it's made of fat. And so when we're eating those omega-3 fatty acids like we have evolved to, those are put into our cell membranes and they have something called pi electrons. And it's basically a fancy name for free dissociable electrons that can be used to create a current. And that's what we see, is that DHA, that omega-3 fatty acid, is put directly into that cell membrane. It's able to create more of a current, able to attract more of that structured water and create more of that quantum biological communication throughout the body. So there's so many different levels here of safety that our body gets just from reconnecting to the way we have evolved over millennia. Because if there's anything we know, is that modern society has just steadily walked away from all of those safety signals we have evolved with. And I love that we're talking about the mental emotional piece and trauma and the vagus nerve, because this is not what we think of, right? This isn't the first thing we think of circadian rhythm and grounding, getting our feet into that sea of electrons that we can pull into our biology, or eating omega-3 fatty acids that actually get those free electrons into our cell membranes, into our fascia, into our vagus nerve, into our nervous system. It's just very powerful stuff, yet so simple, so effective. And that's another thing I like about it, Kelly, is that the more we give accessible options to people, especially in this relational way, really allowing them to put the pieces together, I feel that we will flip another page in history and get to closer to the new paradigm that we need in health, right? Is when everybody has access to this and then says, no, you guys are doing it wrong, right? When I was in school, talking about thyroid,
Yeah.
all of the labs are just still messed up. They don't follow what the endocrinologists, the ones that deal with hormones, the ones that are the experts in thyroid hormones, they say the levels should be this. The labs currently now, the levels are much higher. And so when I was in school, I called the lab. Why are you guys doing this? The endocrinologists, the experts say this. Why do your labs say
Mhm.
this? Why are you guys letting TSH be so high? It should be lower. You know, there should be a lower threshold of normal. And the lab tech said, we just don't have the manpower to educate the doctors. So as soon as you guys start calling and wanting different lab values, we'll change it. But we don't have the educational arm to do this. And so that's what I love about providing this free information is this is not, you know, $1,000 uh,
Mhm.
devices or fancy things. This is accessible stuff that we can get healthier today with, and then use that resilience and energy to be like, give us what works.
Mhm.
Give us clean air, give us clean water, stop polluting, stop giving us band-aids. Let's get to a healthcare system that really prioritizes health.
Yeah. Wouldn't that be? I think it's completely possible. I think
Mhm.
that it's so simple though that people have a hard time sometimes. I don't know if your patients do, but I mean, to really think what just walking around outside earthing. And so those free electrons, I just want to reiterate for people that maybe didn't totally catch that. We're talking about these free electrons are on our Earth's surface. So any natural surface like grass, sand, dirt, even concrete, I'm told is fine as long as it's not asphalt or like covered with, plastic or rubber or any of those kinds of things. And so we're literally talking about walking around, getting skin on the Earth's surface. So it could be
Mhm.
hands touching trees, it could be feet walking around. But
Mhm.
even people who tell me, "Oh, I spend a lot of time in nature," I'm like, "In what shoes?" Um, because it's great that we're in nature. And the sun, I mean, the fact that light is so important that people don't seem to understand how important or how foundational this light natural light is for us. But it really is that simple. And the food we eat really does matter. And I've found that the more, I mean, obviously, I think it matters, right? Because I like the nutrition piece and the gut health piece a lot. But I'm finding that the immune system will calm down if we're doing all of the earthing and we're outdoors and we're getting the right nutrients, is particularly the fat, the essential fatty acids, particularly DHA. I could not agree more. If there
Mhm.
was one thing, I think if people can eat seafood, uh, I know that if people aren't close to any kind of body of water, it might feel strange because I do think that there's something about circadian rhythms and eating local seasonal food that's
Mhm.
grown near you. So it makes sense to your body and your mitochondria like, oh, this is the season I'm in. This is the part of the world I'm in. But the one exception I would say is DHA. I mean, just to get DHA from seafood, if you have to, from supplement. And I do think when people are really, really sick and you can tell that it's the microbiome is off, their digestion is off. I work with a lot of people that mental health and digestive issues tend to go hand in hand. So where there's one, right, there's no separation, like we said. We don't just cut it off and right here, it's cut off. Um, so, but just this understanding that sometimes you need a lot more than you think you need of the DHA and getting good fat. And I think a lot of, a lot of the clients that come to me have tried plant-based for a while, and their mental health starts to go decline and their cognitive ability. And so I'm very much about eating an ancestral approach, and we evolved eating meat and eating animals. And so, and from a nutrient density and a nutrient bioavailability of those nutrients, I think it's important that we have all of that in place. I don't know if you're nodding, so I think you agree with that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I agree, and just to say I respect everyone's
Just,
diet
yeah,
choices, right? There's so many things that play into that,
sure.
but just asking me on a health level, what do I think when people come into me? I am very much ancestral and whole foods, right? And not this binary, we're going to eat carnivore, we're going to eat keto, we're going to do this. It's like, whew, let's just focus on those whole foods, right? Plant foods in a lot of circles have been sort of demonized, right?
I know.
Um, and I love them. I think all of in naturopathic school, we have some irritating sayings like eat a rainbow, right? It's so like but it's really really true, because all of those phytochemicals, I mean, you were talking about the electrons that we pull up from the earth going into that electron transport chain in the mitochondria and making more energy, right? Well, when we look at whole foods and what we get from our plant foods, um, of all colors, it's really important because those polyphenols go into that mitochondrial electron transport chain. And when electrons are lost,
Yes.
and what happens when electrons are lost, right? They become reactive oxidative species, which can cause damage. They also serve as signals, but
Yeah.
for the most part, we don't want our electrons lost, right? So these polyphenols, these colors in our plants, go into the electron transport chain,
Mhm.
grab those lost electrons, and stick them back at the beginning of the chain and say, okay, we're giving you another chance to create energy. And that's just amazing. So many people are talking about methylene
Mhm.
blue,
Methylene
right?
blue. Mhm.
Yeah, and molecular hydrogen.
Yeah,
That's what we have going on with our polyphenols. And it's not to knock those things.
sure.
Um, it's just to let everyone know that those things are available in nature. That's what those colors are. That's what the blue in blueberries are, the red in tomatoes, the green in that evil kale, right? It's all part of that beautiful system that our ecosystem has provided for us to accelerate that energy production through that mitochondrial electron transport chain. It's
Mhm.
absolutely amazing. And I completely agree with you. Getting back to those whole foods, focusing on good fat. And when we start to really tease it down to the molecules and
Yes.
what's happening,
Mhm.
we see that these things can be easily sulfated, meaning that they can hold more structured water. They can bring more structured water into the body. So again, we come back to this fundamental quantum biological foundation that everything seems to have. And it's just really, really exciting. And I love to talk about the vagus nerve and trauma, because I love that we're talking about it because it's so underserved in the quantum biological world. Um,
Hmm.
and it's just absolutely fascinating what eating whole foods and grounding and syncing with the sun and the rhythm of the sun does to our nervous system. And we spoke about Gerald Pollack and his lab. He's done amazing research with those. Let's take one step back because I'm going to start using some big words. So when we talk about our vagus nerve,
Yeah.
it is covered and innervated all throughout with fascia. And our fascia connects every single cell in our body.
Right.
And the fascia is made up of collagen. And it's made up, so our DNA, we're used to that double helix bond, right? Our fascia is made up of a triple helix. It's called a tropocollagen. And they're so small, they create these nanotubules. And this is where we see that quantum communication happening. And Pollock and his team out of the University of Washington actually made a collagen tubule and added infrared energy in the form of light, right? It was a lamp, not our sun, but we can make some inferences about what the sun would do, right? And so he took this tubule of collagen, of fascia, and put infrared energy on it and saw not only the structure water forming on the outside of the tube, but he saw it forming on the inside of the tube. And he saw that it created a flow through that tube. The energy of the structured water that we're talking about, the ability of that lattice formation to trap that energy from infrared light, that photonic energy, and translate it into the flow of water and electrons and protons through that nanotubule of fascia that we have throughout our vagus nerve. It's absolutely phenomenal. And these are things that should be part of the mainstay when we're talking about trauma, when we're talking about safety, when we're talking about mental health. These things are completely not even on the radar, and they're so fundamental. And this day and age, I don't know anybody that hasn't been touched by trauma or chronic stress.
I agree 100%. Right. And that actually kind of, well, I don't want to go on that tangent. I was thinking that can actually, um, I guess, irritate me when, so colleagues will come to me and ask me about gut health with one of their clients. And I'll say, well, tell me about their trauma history. Oh, no trauma. I'm like, well, did they have a birth? Were they born? Like, I mean, I mean, I don't mean to be, I understand that the word trauma gets thrown around a lot, but we can see, I mean, you can feel, and yes, there's traumatic growth. It can actually spark an awakening for people. It's not all doom and gloom and bad, but you can also literally see where there's block,
Yeah.
where there's no longer that flow that you're talking about when we're talking about in the fascia, where we need the flow in the communication, and the fact that infrared light, which is available outside people, outdoors in natural light, regardless of the weather, like it doesn't have to be a sunny, beautiful day, like that's available to us for free. And yes, we can use red light therapy and we can get devices for people who are trying to heal, but this is a way that we can heal at a deeper level. And so, yes, I think this is not common knowledge, but it's also surprising to me that people aren't trauma informed necessarily either. And once you start talking to people, you realize we all have some trauma, whether it impacted us in a way that's really detrimental to our immune system and our nervous system are reacting. And I don't know in your clientele, but I've also seen where a person can get along really, really well. High functioning, super functioning, high functioning people. And that then something happens that even isn't even that big of a deal to them, like a surgery or something they're not even thinking of as a trauma necessarily, but their stress bucket is now full.
Yep.
And then you have a cascade of immune response, a nervous system reaction that the body's like, hello, no, I'm
Yep.
done. I cannot take any more. And
Yep.
it's kind of difficult for people to back up enough and kind of untangle it, and see. And I don't know in your practice, like how you approach people, because to untangle it a bit, like where would you even start? Just telling people to walk around outside, like get in the
Yeah,
light.
yeah. No, I totally agree with you. I think that, we talk about trauma, capital T versus
Yes.
lowercase t.
Yes.
And I think that there's two things happening, like from a political or social dynamic way. It's important that we understand there are capital T's traumas that
Mhm.
are happening and sort of perpetuated by the systems that be. That's important. And I'm not negating that at all.
Right.
But we all have these lowercase t's, and different size buckets and different size fillings of buckets, so to speak, right? So that I have no place for that in my practice. I look at where there might have been an emotional trauma, regardless if someone was bullied when they were 3. My own picture, I went to a school in the South that had corporal punishment, and it was still very, very racist at the time when I was in grade school. And that had a significant traumatic um, impact on me, even though I wasn't the main target for that, right?
Right.
And so that doesn't negate the bigger trauma and social issues that were there, but with my system, it was a trauma still. And so when I talk with my patients, I let them know about how significant these smaller traumas can be and how significant reconnecting to the world around us for that sense of safety and belonging can be. So many of us are in relationships where we've both been traumatized, and it's not unhealthy, but it's not a complete uh, exhale, right? Because we're both working with those trauma patterns. And so when I have patients in my office, I say, let's first do a week of circadian alignment. And I want you to focus on your relationship with the sun. And I go through the science because people seem to really latch on to that. And then that allows them to really own that information. And Kelli, I've never had a patient come back say, okay, I did that circadian stuff. And like, now what? When are you going to give me something that works? Right? They all have some impact that is motivating to them enough to keep them going on this circadian alignment. So that's where I start. I start with the relationship with the sun. And then just to be clear, some people come see me and they're really sick. So I have them with a blanket and a chair by an open door sipping tea, right?
Right.
It's
Right.
small steps because the goal is always there, or the source is always there. The sun is always there for us to walk towards. Whatever kind of step we can take towards it is going to be beneficial. And just to kind of extend this picture out, the sun is our biggest source of infrared energy, but sound makes infrared, right? Our mitochondria makes infrared. Um, there's so many thoughts and emotions make infrared. There's so many different ways for us to access this. It's really exciting. There isn't a one-way street. It's very holographic, and it starts with one step. just one step closer to those relationships that are waiting to heal us.
Oh, I love that. It's amazing. I know we don't have a ton of time left. We have just a few minutes, so we could go so deep into so many of these things. And I think circadian biology, since I have you here, I just wanted to say, just to get your thoughts about you're just so I thought we all need to get out. I tell everybody who will listen, including clients, of course, but anybody, like to get out in early morning light. It's actually so helpful, particularly UVA for our mood. I don't think people connect how much our food is related to our mood and also the sunlight and getting those that. So, and I agree. Like, I've even, if you work with teenagers, like have them take their devices outside. Like, don't rip the device because they're not going to do that, but sit next to an open window on their devices. Crack the window on the way to work, like whatever you can do. Um, so the light and the dark, but I have seen that there's some information about we all are diurnal beings. Human beings are diurnal, as best I can tell. We're day living creatures. So we do, so to get in that morning light, but are there differences in people? Like, do we need to play with this a little bit with people? So, because I think of also eating, like eating during daylight hours and finishing your food by sunset if you can, right? And then so it's not just about being out the light, but also the food and all of the things that contribute to our circadian rhythms. But I guess what I'm asking is, how much variability do you think individually we might have?
I think that that's a good question. And when I was in school, I would have said, oh, there's so much, because I was a night owl. I did my
Right, me
best
too.
work at night, right? So I was like, oh, there's a lot of variation. And I would always hit on those research articles that says, there is variations. Okay. We are diurnal. We are human animals living on planet Earth in this solar system. There is an irreplaceable relationship we have with the sun that we are inseparable, intimately and inseparably tied to the sun. So with my patients, I tell them we can work with differences, right? But not a whole bunch. So what I say is get out in the sun before 10 a.m. Get out in that morning sun. And that's several hours, right? So I'm given some leeway there. And I say, 15 minutes is great. A couple 15-minute breaks in the day, if that's all you can manage, this is the starting point. 15 more minutes before 10, 15 minutes throughout the day, a couple times in that full light. I'm in the Pacific Northwest and it's just gray, but that is medicine too. And then the flip side of that is seeing the sunset and then lowering the lights, right? So I have a teen and a young child at home, and what do? We're in the Pacific Northwest and it gets dark sometimes at 4:30 or 5 o'clock, right? So we move to incandescent bulbs. They each have their own little non-blue red light, reading light, so they can do whatever crafting projects and have like a sense of autonomy, right?
Yeah.
We use salt lamps, and it's absolutely amazing just those small steps have on our mood, on our metabolism, on our immune system, on our nervous system, on our sense of anxiety and depression, all of those things. It's absolutely fundamental to realign with that sun.
I
Absolutely.
100% agree. And I think it's a piece of the healing, whether it's physical, mental health, whatever your trauma that you're trying to heal. It's a piece that I think is missing in a lot of people. They put a lot of pieces in the puzzle, and this is the piece that they're like, oh, the light. Yeah,
Yes.
the light. And then honoring the dark. Oh, honoring the dark. Yes. Yeah. So I know we could go on and on and on. And this has been so amazing, so helpful. I think just the practical pieces with the science, you do a beautiful job of blending So helping us understand the science, but the practical piece of that. So I really appreciate that about you. And I know you have courses so people can find you and work with you and take some classes with you if they want to go deeper and learn more. I think that's amazing. And so yeah, and I also just wanted to know what nourishes. I know you're doing all this, but is there anything in particular that really nourishes you? Because you're giving back to so many people. You're doing so much in the world. So what is particularly nourishing to you?
I think I think my relationship with the sun is very nourishing. I think my relationship with the earth and nature, um, especially here in the Pacific Northwest in summer. It's very, very gratifying and nourishing. And to be honest, my family is just an amazing source of love and inspiration. And so those things nourish me, and also quiet. I've found in my later years that silence nourishes me. So those four things, even though they aren't always compatible, my family is very loud.
Yeah.
but,
Yeah.
but yeah, those things absolutely nourish me, and I'm grateful for them every day.
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, thank you so much.